Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just pulling up the live stream on my phone so I can see some of the comments because we got some word that our comments aren't working on our live stream. So let's pull this up. I'll leave that right there. Perfect. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Shiloh. My pronouns are he and him. I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the affirming reflections. So I've been going on a theme the last few live streams, kind of talking about some queer folks within the Bible and kind of talking about some of the homoerotic stories and trans, gay, and lesbian characters that may or may not be within the stories that we've read so many different times. And so, yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about David and Jonathan. So I know many of you are probably familiar with both of these characters. David is a huge character within the Bible, being, the lineage of Jesus and being a large king and taking up a lot of the Old Testament in his stories. I'm actually going to turn this light on to get a little bit more light. And so, yeah, so David is a huge figure within the Bible, and so we're going to talk a little bit about them. So, first off, David and Jonathan are both figures in the kingdom of Israel. So they formed a covenant recorded in the Old Testament books of Samuel. So 1st and 2nd Samuel is where you get the stories of both men. Jonathan was the king, or the son of King Saul, who was the king of Israel at that time. They were part of the tribe of Benjamin. And then there was David. So David was the son of Jesse in Bethlehem, and he was part of the tribe of Judah. And he was kind of essentially Jonathan's rival for the crown. So God, told David that he will be king, but Saul was already king, and Jonathan was his oldest son, and so Jonathan was meant to be the king after the death of Saul. But according to God, that wasn't the case, and once Saul passed, that the kingship would then be transferred over to David. So the biblical text does not explicitly depict their relationship as being anything more than essentially a friendship. The traditional mainstream religious interpretations of their relationship seems to be one of a platonic love. But it's not until later in some of the medieval and Renaissance and even now modern interpretations that they're starting to see that there are a lot more underlying themes, underlying tones between the friendship of the two men that may or may not have been homoerotic. And so, yeah, so we see the first connection between the two men after David slays Goliath. So that's obviously a big, important story. We've seen a whole bunch of different stories about that. I know my roommate always talks about, my ex-roommate, I guess, always talked about David and Goliath, and would always do a fun trick with a stone. And so the first time that Jonathan and David met was when Abner brings David to King Saul after the death of Goliath. And David's still holding Goliath's severed head. And Jonathan is there and sees David and takes immediate liking to David. And then the two form an immediate covenant. And this is what the covenant states. And this is found in 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 to 5. So Jonathan says, now it came, or the verse says, now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. I think that's pretty gay. And Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him and as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered, and Saul sent him over the men of war. And so we have, these stories of David and Jonathan meeting for the first time, and immediately we see that there is a connection between these two men. This connection is obviously very strong, that they form a covenant right away without taking time to learn about each other. there's already a sense of intimacy there because, you know, they're stating that Jonathan's soul was knitted to the soul of David, and so that really shows there is a huge intimate relationship between the two. So what is the traditional Christian interpretation of this story? So at first we see that for the last few hundred years that this interpretation has been one of a platonic relationship between David and Jonathan. So this is kind of the mainstream view that is found in a lot of biblical exegesis, and it's been written time and time again with Christian writers, and it argues that, you know, just because the connection between David and Jonathan was very strong and very close, that it was ultimately a platonic relationship. And the covenant that was made between the two wasn't a covenant of marriage or a covenant of love, but rather it was a covenant that was probably political, and not erotic or intimate at all. And with the intimacy that they do share or show, is more of a case of male bonding and male friendship rather than some sort of intimate sexual relationship. So David and Jonathan's love is understood as the intimate camaraderie between two young soldiers with no sexual involvement. That's kind of the general consensus. And because there is no documents of any physical intimacy between the two characters, aside from kissing, but at that time and place, kissing was something that was done quite regularly at that time and in that context and in that culture. So kissing between two men was not seen as gay. In a way, it was more of a common thing, and we see that today with many cultures where, you know, you'll kiss each other, kiss the cheeks. So that's still around today. That doesn't mean that someone is sexually intimate with someone because they kiss them. So it also shows some of the traditional interpretations of David and Jonathan talk about how neither of the men had any problems with their heterosexual married life. So we see that David had abundance of wives and even concubines, and then had an adulterous affair with Bathsheba. And we even see that Jonathan doesn't have a lot of relationships that we see, but we do know that he had a 5-year-old son by his death. So he did have at least one intimate relationship with someone who could bear children. And so because of that, this is why we have this traditional interpretation that there was no scenes of sexual intimacy. They already had wives and children, and so because of that, they can't be gay. And so many of us know that that's obviously not the case. You can definitely be in a different orientation marriage and still be gay. You know, you don't have to have sex with someone to be gay. And so it's a very limiting box and a limiting interpretation that we see now. So here we see that some of the homoerotic themes and interpretations. So we're going to take a little look at some of the modern scholars and writers have been interpreting David and Jonathan's relationship. So most folks have been saying that the love between David and Jonathan was way more intimate than a standard platonic friendship. This interpretation views the bonds that men shared as a romantic love, regardless of it being physically consummated. So because the Bible doesn't talk about any physical intimacy, doesn't mean that their intimate, emotional intimacy wasn't gay enough. So Jonathan and David cared deeply about each other, and that was obviously shown throughout the entirety of the two books of Samuel. And a lot of scholars argue that this intimate, deep caring and love was stronger and more intimate than any platonic friendship that we see today and that we saw in any of the friendships that we see in the Bible. We even see this in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26, when David sings his praise of love towards Jonathan. It says here, Jonathan's love for him over the love of women is considered evidence for same-sex attraction. Along with, even we see that Saul talks to Jonathan at the dinner table saying, I know you have chosen the son of Jesse, which is a disgrace to yourself and the nakedness of your mother. and choosing, the term choosing, or bahar, indicates more of a permanent choice or some sort of firm relationship, as well as the nakedness that Saul states, Hebrew is irwa, could be interpreted to convey a negative sexual nuance, giving the impression that Saul may have seen something between David and Jonathan that he didn't like. Some other homoerotic scholars say that a lot of folks point out that the relationship between the two men is addressed with the same words and emphasis that other love relationships state in the Hebrew Testament. So whether they were heterosexual or homosexual, whether they were about, love between people like father, son, daughter, mother, as well as love between humans and God. And so this term is called agava, and it's the Hebrew word for love. So this is the same language that is used. So this term love, ahava, is used for non-romantic as well as non-sexual love, and also love between parent and children. So it's essentially very close to the English term love. When I say I love someone, I definitely say that I love my mother, I love my father, I love my siblings. But that love is different than how I would say I love my partner. And so, but when I say love, it still means that I love them. I'm still saying the same word. And so in Hebrew, it's the same way. When you have ahava written, it could be, love between a parent and a child. It could be a love between two partners. It could be the love between friends. And we can't really tell without, knowing that person's intent of what they're using. Because the word written down is the same, whereas the expression of that differs. It's not like Greek. Because with Greek, we have the four loves. We have the storge love, which is the empathy bond. This is usually between family members. We have the philia, which is the friendship bond, and that is usually between close siblings or between friends. Fun fact, Philadelphia actually means brotherly love in Greek, if you break up the two words. In Greek, we also even have eros, which is the romantic love. And then agape, which many of you probably know, means the unconditional love of God. And so in Greek, we have multiple different ways to express love, and there's different terms for that. In Hebrew, there are three. There's aheb, which is the term that is used for David's love with Jonathan. And then there's two other words, chabab, as well as chahak. And so these three terms all mean love in some way or another. Aheb is the most common one. This one usually means describe love between friends, love between partners, and love between family. The other two usually means more, affection or longing, or delight or desire. And so these ones are usually found in different parts of the Bible. Most of these have to talk about sometimes love between two people, as well as love towards God, or God loving the earth, God loving the people. And so oh, we got a message from Pam. Oh dang, 12 minutes late. How's that? Oh yes, no, it's definitely, yeah, Philadelphia, because Delphia is brother and Philly is love, and so brotherly love is what the whole city, I don't know anything about geography when it comes to the states, is all about. So yeah, fun fact. So yeah, so these two other words that are used for love aren't as often, and we see them more between God's love and as well as romantic love. But the romantic love, I wouldn't even want to say that it's romantic love, because the only instance that these two other love words are used is more so, how do I say this? It seems more like aggressive love, like I desire you, I lust for you. And that's kind of the tones that come from those two. But the term love that we see in 1st and 2nd Samuel between David and Jonathan is the ahab word. And this is the one that is used for all types of love between parents, siblings, and partners. Just to clarify all of that. Where were we? So yeah. So when they are alone together, we even see that David confides that he has found grace in Jonathan's eyes. So this is a phrase that is normally used in a romantic or physical relationship. But, however, there are times where this phrase has been used in non-sexual or non-romantic contexts as well. And so you even say throughout the passages, David and Jonathan consistently affirm and reaffirm their love and devotion to one another. And Jonathan is willing to betray his entire family, his father, his wealth, his status, his class, and everything. He's risking all of it for David. And as much as I love my friends, I don't think I would be able to, give everything for them. I would like to, but I think that's a hard thing to do. But if you love someone so deeply, like I love my partner or I love my close family, those are ways in which I would die for one another. And so because of this, we see that the relationship is so intense and so intimate that it's hard to believe that it was just a small friendship. So yeah, we even see homoerotic scholars even say that there's highly eroticized language that are present in 6 different sections in these stories. So we see the first instance when David and Jonathan first meet. We see that with the covenant that they made, what did he say? He said, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. That's very erotic in the first sense. We see even that there's description of David and Jonathan's first few meetings later on in the story. We see the incident with Saul berating Jonathan at the dinner table for his friendship with David. We even see another instance, the 4th instance, being David fleeing from the court of King Saul, and the description of David and Jonathan's final meeting as well. And then lastly, we see the Song of the Bow, which is David's lament when he found out about the death of Saul and Jonathan. And so all of these instances between both these men's relationships in these stories have huge erotic themes within them. And so we even see here that even though David was married, he himself articulates a distinction between his relationship with Jonathan and the bonds and relationship he made with women. And he says that. He says, that, my love for you is not like the love I have for women. We even see here that David is married to many women, even one of the women being Jonathan's sister. But the Bible doesn't mention anything about David loving these women, although it does say that David's sister loves David, or Jonathan's sister loves David. And so there's all this talk about all these women loving David, but yet we don't see him, we see him talking about his love for Jonathan quite often. We even see that some folks see that a lot of people think of their relationship as a friendship rather than a homoerotic or a romantic or an intimate relationship between 2 gay men, is because when you read these stories, folks who are straight, who have been, reading and researching and spreading the Bible within the last few hundred years, comparatively, when they read those things, they see their own homosexual experience in their stories. They see a love between 2 people. They see a covenant. They see a partnership. And so they see themselves in that relationship, either with their friends or with their partners. But when it comes to trying to think of a loving gay relationship, straight Christian folks often can't embody or envision or interpret a loving, caring, respectful, intimate gay relationship, because all the experience about homosexual acts are that of aggression, violence, rape, domination, and subjection, because that's all we see in the Bible. I know I've done a few live streams about gay marriage and how a lot of the verses, the clobber passages within the Bible that have to do with homosexual acts are all about violence and rape and domination and just exploitation, and all of that. And so seeing this loving relationship between two men, it can't be gay people, because that's not how gay people are. That's kind of the mentality that they have, and so that's why they already personify a friendship between the two rather than a love. Pan says, is this the same David and Goliath, eventually King David? Yes, it's all the same. So David takes up quite a bit of the Old Testament. It starts off with David, killing Goliath, and then meeting Saul, who's the king at the time, and David gets a high ranking because of his defeat with Goliath, and that's how he met Jonathan. And then the two are friends, but King Saul and David have a huge fight because Saul finds out that God wants David to be king, and Saul doesn't want to give up his kingdom yet. And eventually, after many years of rivalry, King Saul dies, and so does Jonathan, and David takes reign and becomes king of Israel. And then he lives a really long life, and we see a little bit more of him in further stories, for sure. So what are some of the counter arguments here? So some other interpreters point out that, neither the books of Samuel or any older ancient Jewish tradition documents talk about any romantic or erotic physical intimacy between the two characters, which the Bible does make evident too, because, we have, the Song of Solomon or the Songs of Songs, and so we do have parts in the Bible that talk about intimacy. So it's not like because it's not there doesn't mean that it couldn't be, but that the Bible does talk about sexual intimacy quite often, and so having it not there usually means that it wasn't happening, but that might not be the case. We even see that the removal of the robe at the start of their covenant is seen more of a ceremonial act following the pre-descent of Aaron, whom God commanded him to strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar, his son. And so we kind of see this maybe being a direct parallel from that story to when Jonathan was symbolically transferring his kingship from himself to David, since he was supposed to be the heir of the kingdom, but he knew that David would then take his spot. We even see the mention of nakedness in 1 Samuel 20, verse 30, when Saul was berating David and Jonathan was there. Saul said the nakedness of his mother, which some homoerotic scholars have been saying that talked about kind of a negative sexual nuance between the two. But these scholars are stating that because of this term nakedness, it's probably relating to Jonathan's mother, rather than to Jonathan's relationship with David. And this is why. It's because this suggests that the phrase is stating that David's theft of Saul's wife supports the construction that the wife of Saul, who is Jonathan's mother, will then become the wife of David. So he's pretty much saying the nakedness of your mother to shame your mother in being okay and being friends with the person that's going to take his place as her husband. So it's quite elaborate. So I actually quite enjoy that counter argument. I think that's probably the only one that I fully agree with. We see here Pan says censorship of the Holy Book. Yes, that is quite true. And there definitely could be some censorship here. And then we even see here a little bit further that the interpreters also argue that the description in 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 26 of the love, which is the Hebrew ahava or aheb, between David and Jonathan, that is greater than the love of women, should be understood in light of the term that it's self-love rather than romantic love. So when David says that his love is greater than the love of women, he's saying that his love for himself is greater, that he loved himself and his own soul more than women. So I don't really think that that one's a great counter argument. But those are all kind of the arguments that we have here. If you have any other arguments or thoughts about David and Jonathan, please throw them in the comments. But to end, I guess, after spewing all of that information at you, I think there's two really important themes and two really important stories that come out of David and Jonathan's relationship. And this is my own interpretation, so feel free to have a different one. But from all the information that I've seen, I think there are two very real and two obvious ways that we can interpret the story. The first one is the traditional Christian interpretation. I do believe that this could be a very intimate, a very caring, a very loving friendship between two men. I think that that is an incredible story to hear, an incredible story to see, and a story that we need to talk about more. I think, you know, talking about the love and the caringness between not only two men, but friends. We see now in our world that, you know, men aren't allowed to be emotional, aren't allowed to, you know, show intimate love between another man in a friendship way without it being gay. You know, the term like no homo, we see, you know, a lot of this, you know, aggression against gay men because they don't want straight men have this, you know, toxic masculinity, this this way of not understanding their own sexuality and being afraid of being labeled gay. And so because of that, we see now that, you know, we don't hear a lot of stories about two men, you know, loving each other in a friendship way. We're starting to see a little bit of that now with a lot more, you know, education and representation of, you know, intimate, friendly love. And so I think this story beautifully displays that. It beautifully displays, you know, two men who are friends, who absolutely will love each other to death. You know, they do everything together. You know, Jonathan literally betrayed his entire family and his lineage to help David become king. You know, David cried and cried and cried when Jonathan died. You know, there was a huge intimate love and partnership there that I think is incredible story. And I think if that is the interpretation you have, then that is absolutely amazing. That is something that we need to talk more about, is showing love and showing intimacy with friends and not being afraid to be labeled gay or being weird. Because I know for me, like, I love all of my male friends. You know, we all talk about it. We all say we love you. We all hug. We all, you know, enjoy our time together, and we're not afraid to show that we care about each other deeply. And that's what I definitely see here. But on the flip side, I do think that they could have been and probably were, maybe not gay, but they probably had some intimacy, sexually and emotionally. I think there could have been some homoerotic relationship between the two. I do think some censorship could be there based off of the idea that at that time the writers, there was no such thing as being gay. And so back then, the only time that they would ever engage in homoerotic behavior was, like I said, it was exploitative, it was dominant, it was raping, it wasn't this loving relationship that we see with David and Jonathan. And so because of that, I think there was a censorship in a way of not fully talking about the full relationship, not on purpose. I think the censorship may have been because of the lack of education behind the writer, because at that time, yeah, the only homoerotic things we saw was very violent and very dominant, and so seeing something like this, it might have not crossed the writer's minds that this may have been something more than friendship. And we see that all the time. You know, we see there was, I can't remember where it was, but I know it was a women's FIFA game. I think it was the Canadian team, and there was a picture that was posted on a magazine, and it was one of the team players running up to the sidelines, jumping up over the podium to kiss her wife. And it was a magnificent photo. It was great. They won the cup or whatever. But the magazine title states the name of the player. I can't remember the name. Kissing a friend after the match. That was the title. They were completely erasing the fact that this player, was gay and openly gay and had a wife that would come to every game, and everyone knew that they were gay and were married, yet the magazine still stated that this was a weird, fun friendship. And so even with the knowledge, there was that censorship. And so I think maybe because of the history of, not having gay people be normalized or understood fully as an orientation at that time, there could have been accidental censorship, and maybe devaluing their relationship towards more of a friendship rather than an erotic, emotional one. And so either way, I think we can take this story and take so much from it. I think if we see them as a very intimate, loving friendship, that is something that is beautiful and amazing that we can definitely take, all of us can see and try to embody. And likewise, with it being two gay men, I think that's the same thing that we can take from. We can see a very loving, caring, deep, emotional, intimate relationship that has nothing to do with power, dominance, lust, or anything that would be required or seen as sinful. We see a very caring, loving relationship between two men that we never see before. And likewise with, the story of Ruth and Naomi, this, loving, deep, caring relationship between two women as well. We're starting to see, and we're starting to take our queer lenses and look into these stories for the first time, and really starting to see ourselves and see this passionate, God loving relationships that we never saw before. And I think this is something that we need to push towards some of the more conservative Christian folks that only see gay relationships as being, very lustful, being very non-biblical, not being safe or friendly or intimate or anything. And so I think these stories really break down the barriers and break down the stereotypes that the LGBTQ community has when it comes to our intimacy and our relationships. We're often seen as very erotic, very sexual, and not biblical at all, yet we have stories here in the Bible that express that. And I think we can definitely take on that and learn from it and push that idea that we can all, have a loving romantic relationship without it being sinful, regardless if we're, straight or gay or trans or asexual or pansexual or bisexual or whatever you identify as. And so, yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts and interpretation of David and Jonathan. Again, like the last few biblical characters that we've been looking at with Joseph, Ruth and Naomi, now David and Jonathan. To give you an factual answer, are they gay? Are they not? I can't tell you that. I don't think we'll ever find out. But I think stating that both David and Jonathan were in a friendship and or erotic relationship, I think both are equally possible and are both valid interpretations. Just with, Ruth and Naomi and with Joseph, both of them, the arguments for and against are both compelling. But at this point in time, I don't think we have enough information to really concretely state that they are or not. But I think these are stories that we can look towards and get insight from when we're practicing our own intimate relationships and our own friendships and our own partnerships between people. So yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm really enjoying these biblical characters. I'm going to look for a few more. I think I want to do a queer Jesus one. So stay tuned for more of these every Monday at noon. So stay tuned for that. I'm also planning to do an Affirming Coffee Hour, and that will start up in September. We're going to meet through Zoom for the first little while until we can meet in person. And that will be, I'm pretty sure, Thursdays at 11, but it's not fully there yet, so stay tuned for any of the posters and the social media posts for that. And I would love for any of you to join me just for the hour, just to hang out, have coffee, ask questions, talk, chat, do what you like. It's kind of a chill hangout hour, so we'll be launching that in September, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you all next Monday at noon. Take care.